Hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on fall private sector recruiting. This is Rob Kikasi in the Office of Career Strategy. Today, we're going to take a moment to focus on what you can be doing for the remainder of fall in the lead up to OCI, the recruiting program that for many takes up a lot of mental space and time on the weekly to-do list. Right now, and I'm recording this on October 5th, with a longer recruiting season for Big Law than in years past due to OCI's move to January, it's probably too early to worry about the mechanics of OCI and how that process will unfold. Instead, let's focus on the work you can do now to put yourself in a better position with OCI employers, as well as those employers who will not be coming to OCI. So in that sense, I'm encouraging you to step back and take a look at the bigger picture, not to be distracted now by the mechanics of OCI. The bigger picture is that employers use a variety of channels to source talent. OCI is not the only game in town. Increasingly, employers, including Big Law, will view recruiting as a longer-term process of engagement. They meet candidates and get a sense of interest and fit. Activity like hosting events, virtual campus visits, participation in smaller recruiting programs, posting of jobs, and opening website application portals are all features of a recruiting market that goes beyond simply OCI. Let's therefore use a wider lens to see how you can be in the best position possible to recruit. Now, to do so, let's think of the recruiting world in the private sector as two separate lists. The first we'll call your free market list. This is the universe of all employers in which you have an interest. It may well be populated by big law firms, but it could also contain smaller, mid-sized firms, in-house counsel positions, and other opportunities that you find of interest. We call it a free market list because this is a universe of employers with whom you can be engaging with at any time to determine their fit for you and their interest in you. It's a world in which you'll be trying to unite the employer needs with the services you can provide. And again, you'd be doing so through many of the channels described on the previous slide. The second list is your OCI list, commonly referred to as your bid list. As we'll touch on in a moment, this is a subset of your free market list, as it's focused on only one portion of the employers out there, chiefly Big Law. Now, here are some features of each list. Note that in the free market, you have access to all employers. You don't have to make choices about how to rank them or concern yourself with landing the interview. You can go directly to them. Another important feature is that the free market list is more extensive than Big Law. This is particularly important in a season of economic uncertainty like the one that we're in, where class sizes look like they'll be smaller at firms coming to OCI. So working to give yourself more choices can be a sensible strategy in this climate. And as we say here on this list, and as I'll explain in a moment, the work you do now in this free market can certainly pay off at OCI down the road. But on the OCI side of the ledger, your list must consider not only fit and interest in the same way as the free market list, but it must look at the strategy for ranking firms as part of the OCI bidding process. So access to employers at OCI cannot be assumed. We're going to talk about that again in a moment. In some senses, though, OCI really does represent the culmination of a recruiting process and not the beginning. So we're going to discuss what you could be doing now to get off on the right foot in that process. So here's a suggested strategy. Step one, and this is assuming you have a decent sense of practice area and geographic focus. If you don't, certainly work with your advisor to get there. First, generate and refine your free market list. Then, use the rest of the fall to engage with those employers on that list. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But let's unpack both of those just a little bit. In generating a list, we encourage you to use some of the OCS resources to get you started. Potential universes should include Big Law, smaller and mid-sized firms, and employers like in-house and consulting companies. And here we have links to some of those resources. You can start to narrow the list as the semester proceeds. Be sure to consider not only what you're looking for in an employer, but also what the employer is looking for in candidates. On your side of the table, you might consider practice area, location, and selectivity, as well as important factors like training and development, commitment to diversity initiatives, and a host of other considerations. On their side of the ledger, remember that employers consider selectivity and practice focus as important initial filters. So you do want to match your preferences with their needs. Some guidance on researching employers is available in our resources. And networking is always a great way to learn more. So once you have your list, it's time to engage. That's a big word in some sense. So we'll spend some time looking at the why as well as the how to do it. First, it's essential because it teaches you more about the organizations. For instance, how this firm might differ from peers, how practice groups are structured, availability of a desired practice area. And it can help you out in the application process should you decide to try to interview with the organization down the road. View engagement as a way to research the potential interview question, why this firm? And also create a positive fact pattern of interactions that show interest. It's an opportunity to learn more while showing that interest again. To do so, it could mean attending virtual receptions, networking directly with attorneys at the organization, and or sending in materials in response to a job posting. Now, it's worth mentioning that should you start to send in application materials on the more formal side of this recruiting process, it could mean that employers will act a little bit early in advance of OCI. There's nothing obliging employers to stay with the OCI schedule and wait for interviewing then. So do be somewhat sensitive to the type of employer you might want to recruit with, and know that they may move a little bit earlier than expected should they see an attractive candidate in the applicant pool. Okay, so that's the activity to engage in now and why to do it. What about that OCI bid list that we mentioned earlier? Because it is the case that OCI is not too far off in the distance, right? It's getting closer with each moment. We're going to be releasing information about employers who are coming and information about how to build the bid list quite soon. But a few points on this at the early stage that we're in, and why what your recruiting activity in the fall can do to help you. The OCI bid list is different than the free market bid list in at least two ways. First, it doesn't contain the full universe of private sector employers. Not everyone comes to OCI. It's mostly big law. Second, unlike the free market list of employers that you can go to at any time to show your interest and catch their attention, OCI does not guarantee access to every participating employer. There are often more students interested in an interview than available slots. So with OCI, you encounter a scarcity problem. As you'll see, the best way to mitigate this scarcity problem is to be active in the free market. For OCI, we work with big firms to get them to interview as many students as possible. However, firms do not have infinite time and resources to interview. As we said, it's often the case that a firm's number of interview slots is lower than the number of students who want to interview. In this case, OCS, like our colleagues at other schools, is confronted with a dilemma. How do we determine who gets the interview? We don't parcel out by GPA or undergrad institution or how someone expresses an interest or last name or anything like that. Instead, we ask students to submit their ranked preferences of whom they want to meet, and then Simplicity runs an algorithm based solely on those preferences. So the higher your bid number, the more likely you are to secure an interview. But hypothetically, if you bid a firm number 2 and dozens of your classmates bid at number 1, it's conceivable that there won't be an interview slot left for you. So you're looking at that scarcity principle again, something you don't have to do in engaging with employers in the free market world. Now, to guide your thinking on this scarcity issue, we'll be providing a list of historical information about how many bids were placed for a given employer. It shouldn't surprise you to note that employers, law firms in New York and Washington, D.C. tend to get the most bids. So in many senses, those are the hardest employers to come by. At the end of the day, there is some guesswork involved because you just don't know how your classmates are going to behave in their bidding. Which, to close, brings us back to the free market approach. The more you can do now, the better. When OCI interviews are released, we'll encourage you to write directly to firms you're interested in, as many of those firms will bring in attractive candidates outside the OCI process. But given the glut of direct applications firms will be getting at this time, it will be helpful to have generated a contact at the firm to help you pull you out of a crowded pile of students seeking an interview. So this is just a last slide with some takeaways that we had put up throughout the remainder of the presentation and some suggestions on how you can be pursuing those engagement goals right now. We understand that students are at different points in the process, and we hope this discussion has provided some more direction for those looking at next steps. As ever, work with your section advisor to tailor this information to where you are and what you're looking for. Please remember that we're here to help.